I'm going to think about that though, because I mean, I'm sure there are other bands that for me were really like, oh, but you don't really know or never got into, and
Yeah.
so it's kind of like, who could I
Home.
home? I don't know a single other person who got
That-
into home like I got into home. Welcome to Backtracking, the show where two old friends take a second listen to influential bands' catalogs, track by track. I am J. William Hall.
And I'm Dan Fiden. We'll be taking this journey together, Jay, William, and I, providing context, both personal and historical, on some legendary bands. For our second season, we've picked none other than pioneering indie rockers American Music Club.
Today on Backtracking, coming to you from the Volcano State, there is no way we're going to forget your spaghetti plate, dear listener. That's right, we're going to make a luau out of AMC's fourth full-length LP, United Kingdom. Released in November of 1989, the album erupted hot on the heels of 1988's California at the request of the band's UK label, Demon Records. In many ways, United Kingdom is a departure from the slick sound of its predecessor, with a number of tracks recorded live in front of an audience. It's filled with surprises and features AMC classics like Kathleen. So are you ready for our big aloha? Dan?
I sure am, JW. Reviews for California were strong, but for a variety of reasons, questionable distribution, limited label support, and the band's inscrutability, radio support and sales remained weak. Nonetheless, Demon wanted to keep up the critical momentum and get another record out quickly. Eitzel was keen, given that he'd been writing prolifically through the spring. But manager Leslie Rule, now a newlywed sporting the Mallon surname, decided the fourth record should be a kind of greatest hits package recorded live. Frontier Records kahuna Lisa Fancher, still less than friendly with Leslie, hated the idea. She felt as though this was a scheme by the Mallons to use a low-effort release to fulfill the last record in the Frontier contract. Eitzel didn't love the idea of a live album either, but he gave in. And so the album would be a UK-only live set recorded at San Francisco bar, the Hotel Utah. The Mallons were pleased.
And so was the band. Kind of. What was left of them. Lisa David, who had joined AMC on bass for much of the California era, was now out due to health issues that included a personal allergy to Tom Mallon. Mallon was more than happy to step into her spot on bass, and so Mike Sims was recruited to replace Mallon on drums. Charlie Gillingham, who went on to success in Counting Crows, joined for the Hotel Utah shows on keys. And Bruce Caffin, Voodie's longtime collaborator who'd played pedal steel on a number of tracks on California, also played at the shows. Caffin had been reluctant to make joining AMC official, but upon hearing the completed record, he had fallen in love with California. The Hotel Utah shows were a mixed bag. The first night was terrific, but then things went downhill. Nonetheless, the recording was completed and submitted to Demon Spike Hyde, who unceremoniously spiked the effort as amateurish. He scolded Mallon for thinking the portable 8-track set up in the toilet of a bar with bad acoustics would result in a releasable album. The band was upset with the reaction, but ultimately agreed. Demon was still hungry for an October release, though, so AMC set out to complete an album of new material in just about a month. They scavenged what they could from the live shows and recorded the rest of the songs in Mallon's studio.
So what other demons were exercised in late 1989? There was a media frenzy following the arrest of the Menendez brothers for the murder of their parents in Los Angeles, and the 6.9 magnitude Loma Prieta earthquake hits California. The first commercial dial-up internet connection is made. Nathan's Hot Dogs opens in Moscow, and NWA's Straight Outta Compton becomes the first gangsta rap album to go platinum. Whoa, JW, here we are.
There was a lot of big news coming out of California in 1989.
That's right, everything. The only thing that didn't happen in California was, of course, Nathan's Hot Dogs in Moscow, which when you think about it now, it sounds like, yeah, who gives a shit, who gives a fuck, like that a fast food place opened in Moscow. But that was a really big deal, as like the Iron Curtain was kind of falling and all that stuff.
That's right. The Cold War was coming to a close. We didn't
Yeah.
realize it, but those were the signs. Those little bits of capitalism creeping into the Soviet Union.
Yeah, you might say, Joel, that the Americans inserted their hot dog deep into the former USSR.
That is one way of looking at it.
That is one way of looking at it. So, enough of the dad jokes. We are here to discuss the unbelievable, often forgotten, I would argue, United Kingdom by American Music Club.
Well, it's a weird album, Dan, because the manner in which it was recorded and released, as we covered in the introduction, it was only released in the United Kingdom.
That's right.
Um,
Which
which for
in those days,
an American band only having a UK only release is just kind of a strange thing.
yeah, and I mean, maybe you can talk through for our younger fans, of which I'm sure there are many, many, many.
Right.
How difficult was it to actually find and procure a UK only release if you were an American fan of an American band?
Well, what you had to do is you had to go to the coolest record stores in your nearby urban center and
Yeah.
see if they had the record available on import, or you had to go to your local record store and go to the clerk and ask, "Can I special order or whatever?" And if they could, then they would order it for you. I happen to do the former.
Yeah.
I'm holding up so Dan can see it.
I
My
can, yeah. There it
original
is.
vinyl Demon Records release of United Kingdom, which I
Yeah.
bought in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, at a cool
What
record
record?
store called Eides,
Mm,
like Eides. I bought it on sale for
mhm.
$6.99.
Wow. Wow. So, no, but normally an import version of anything was about twice the cost, is my recollection.
Yeah, it was.
But they
Which
were, I
seemed
remember many times kinda when you and I were living together in Chicago, this would have been in 19, I'm gonna say 97 or 98. We would
yeah.
go and comb through the bins of various record stores, and I will tell you, when you found an import from a band that you loved, it was like that, oh, happy day.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean that was like, striking gold.
Yeah, that really was striking gold. So, well, let's talk about whether the band struck gold with this release. Why don't
Beautiful segue.
So before we get into that too much, this album came out. It was released on November 9th, 1989. Unfortunately, today, out of print. The only place you can get it is on the AMC Bandcamp. The link is in the show notes. Please go over there, check it out. Um, I am gonna, I'm gonna say high level. I'm gonna start at the highest level. This album for me is what I love about backtracking. I had almost completely forgotten about this album. I knew it existed, but it isn't an album that I had kind of ever really put on for fun. It was not front of mind for me. When I think about the albums in the AMC catalog, but I listened to this album, 20 times in preparing for this, in preparing for the podcast, and I've got to say, I love this album. I think it is an absolutely stellar, incredibly consistent album.
It was really fascinated, because of course, you kind of write the introductions based
Yeah,
on, the Sean Body book,
that's right.
and I did not read that book. So, like, even just reading the introduction, I was like, "Oh, I didn't realize the dynamics that had led to the creation of this album," which was,
Yeah,
the Mallons wanted a live album, and, that Frontier was like, "We're not interested."
yeah,
And so this album sort of like was, stillborn in a way, like just kind of, this is always going to be an oddity of the
yeah,
discography, but it's got amazing songs on it, and it's a short album, and it's strange because there's like 3 live tracks and then the rest are studio.
yeah.
But I don't think there's a dud song on the album, and we'll get into it track by track, but I was just fascinated because, I've been digging, of course, online to find all of the demos and all of the
Yeah.
whatever, and there's a large collection of Eitzel demos from this period, like between California and Everclear, basically. and you know, and there's all kinds of unreleased songs,
Yeah.
you know, amongst those demos, and some of the first versions of the stuff that kind of came on here. And I mean, you know, I think this album just it has a tossed off nature, but the
Yeah.
songs are so good. The songs are great, you know.
Yeah. So, if we end up doing an ephemera, kind of an early career ephemera episode later on in the season, I'm sure we're going to talk about that series of 4-track demos. There's a great YouTube channel that has the complete set of these 4-track demos, and they're called like the Mark Eitzel 4-track
Four
tragedy or
tracks,
something.
four track of shame.
4-track of shame, but it's actually a really good set of 4-track recordings with some very interesting songs on it.
Yeah.
But we're not going to dig into that today. We're really just going to focus on this album. So maybe
As
to
much
talk.
as much as it hurts me, as much as it hurts me to
Yeah.
my core to not be able to dig into these lo-fi 4-track demos,
Yeah.
I'm gonna go straight onto the album.
We're gonna go straight onto the album, but who knows? We may hit these. We may have an opportunity to hit these later on in the season. So to talk a little bit more about the fascinating history that really I learned from the Sean Body book, which I of course highly recommend everyone go out and find. Of course, it is out of print as well, but go find a copy. You can find them on Amazon. Um, Essentially, what happened is they did a short tour following California in Europe, and they really built a lot of momentum. Tons of critical praise. I mean, the critical praise that they were getting in the UK is really stunning to read. I mean, they were being gushed over by all of the major UK kind of music publications. And so really understandably, their UK label Demon didn't want to wait too long for another album. They hadn't really had a huge commercial breakthrough. They hadn't had a radio breakthrough with California, but they wanted to kind of keep their foot on the gas with the critics and with the growing crowds that they were playing in front of in Europe. And so they requested an album. Eitzel and the rest of the band were not thrilled with the idea of doing a live album. Because he had written all of these interesting songs on the 4-track, but ultimately the
So,
Mallons kind of pushed for it, and they won out.
well, this is what I'm thinking. Like I'm trying to play devil's advocate and sort of
Yeah,
like put myself in the Mallon's place here. And
yeah,
it's like they have this, you know, fledgling label that
yep,
AMC is kind of one of the marquee bands. They
yep,
see a whole bunch of momentum built behind, you know, their previous album, which,
yeah,
you know, they kind of shoestrung the thing together, you know, and got it out there. So to have even that amount of critical praise is like an enormous success.
yeah,
And so I can understand the desire to say, "Oh, but there's all these great songs, you know,
yeah,
from a couple albums ago or whatever, and like if we could present those all in like the best possible light, like that would really, you know, make us skyrocket." Like I can understand the logic behind that. I found curious was that you talked about this super kind of like janky sounding setup or
yeah,
whatever to
yeah,
record the
yeah,
live set, and that's the part where I'm kind of like, you know,
yeah. Yeah, I mean,
maybe
listen,
I don't know what the circumstances behind that were, you know.
similar, perhaps similarly to you, when I first read this and read about that conflict, my initial reaction was, of course, to kind of side with Mark Eitzel and the band and say, and it could be the function of the way this book is written. I'm not gonna say that it portrays Tom Mallon and his wife in a negative light, but it definitely raises some issues. And that may not be the true history, right? I don't know. It probably will never be written. Um, but my first reaction was to kind of say, fuck the Mallons, that was the wrong decision. But I have to say, after listening to this album a few times and listening to the live versions of the live songs that are on this album, I have some notes in here when we actually go through some of those. I in some ways came around to their logic perhaps a little bit more because there is something totally magical about American Music Club live and Eitzel as a performer live that doesn't come across in the studio albums really at all. I mean, the studio albums I'm a huge fan of, and I think there are different things that come across, but there is this certain emotive spontaneity, intimacy. I don't know what other words you can use, but there is a certain je ne sais quoi, JW, about AMC Live that I wonder maybe, maybe the Mallons were saying, like, listen, that isn't coming across in these studio albums, but that is part of the magic of this band. And maybe as we're trying to kind of launch them, a live album would be a good way to introduce listeners who haven't had a chance to see them live to some of that magic.
I think that that's a compelling argument, that has to be part of what they were thinking, because it is absolutely true that AMC as a live experience are something slightly different from the recorded experience, at least, especially in these earlier albums, maybe, like I think, like, part of their evolution as they go along is they get better at sort of marrying, those things together. But um yeah, like I mean the three well, we'll get into it when we get into the track listing, but it's like the live songs that are on this album though are not previously released songs. They're new
That's
songs.
right.
So,
That's right. It
yeah,
is
so it's
it
like a
is
compromise.
in many ways it's kind of a confounding album to wrap your head around. But I will say, and then going back to the production and the choice to kind of do it on a portable 8-track. And if you've ever been to the Hotel Utah, have you ever been there,
I have
JW?
not, but I've seen these videos. There are videos that Tom Mallon posted on his YouTube channel of uh, a live performance that the band, videotaped, I think when they were trying to do that promo film for California.
Yeah.
And you can see Mallon over there on the side pushing
Yeah.
buttons on what looks like a Tascam 8-track Porta Studio. It's just like on a chair, kind of sitting over on the side,
Yeah.
so I mean, but I mean, come from my perspective, I'm like all the more impressed. I'm like, oh my God,
Yeah.
like, like they managed to get this amazing recording out of that, sort of flimsy of a setup or whatever, but they did, so who am
Well,
I to argue?
yeah, I will say that Lisa Fancher in the book, the Frontier Records boss, um, it says that kind of when she heard this idea, she said, it was essentially, I'm paraphrasing here, she essentially said it was insane of them to think that they were going to get good sound out of a portable 8-track at a venue like the Hotel Utah, which, if you've ever been there, is kind of visually, you can tell by being in the place it's going to be horrible acoustics. It's a relatively small venue. There's a stage at one end. It's kind of an old Victorian house, and along one side of the room where you watch the bands is all just these windows, like a Victorian house window type thing, right? These big glass windows. On the other side of the glass is a road and a big highway off ramp.
Mm.
I mean, it really just does not look like the kind of place that you'd want to record anything. But in any case, we can second guess those decisions all we want. But I guess overall, the thing that kind of I settled on when considering the album in its entirety is, although we probably have to classify this as a full length LP, I think of this as a little bit more of an EP, as a long EP. And
Yeah.
I'd compare it more to, like, this is a weird comparison. Um, GNR Lies from Guns N' Roses, which was, of course, the stopgap release that came out after Appetite for Destruction. It had 4 acoustic songs on it and 4 live songs on it, and I believe it was all new material, so there was no old Guns N' Roses songs on it, but there was like a couple of covers on it. I think it was just kind of a weird grab bag, although it was, I believe, 8 songs. So I kind of, when I was listening to this, I was like, maybe that's the right framework to think of this as. It's a super great EP rather than a kind of short shrifted LP.
I guess I still think of it as a short shrifted LP because it does play like an album, like there's a
Yeah, it does.
distinct side one, side two, there's ebbs and flows, and I think like the track order is pretty strong, and it showcases a lot of different sides of the band in one, kind of package. So I still think of it as an album, but it feels like an EP because I think because of it wasn't released in the US, and, it wasn't promoted very heavily probably. And I don't know, it does feel like in band lore, they skipped from California to Everclear. And
Yeah.
this kind of got like passed over somehow, but unfair, I say, and we'll get into it.
Okay. Well, why don't we talk about the productions, the just kind of our overall thoughts, and then we'll get into the cover art. Then we can go track by track. But to start the overall, why don't we just lay out there are the 3 live tracks that were recorded that were salvaged from the Utah live sessions are Nevermind, Kathleen, and Hula Maiden. Um, I want to talk about the production of the songs. Well, maybe start with that. 4 8-track Porta Studio recordings. I actually think these 3 songs, the recording quality is really good. I have no issues with the recording quality of any of these 3 tracks. Now, granted, 2 of them are essentially Eitzel solo live, and very evocative of kind of Songs of Love live if you've heard that solo album. But overall, I wouldn't say that these are kind of unreleasably bad recordings. I think they're pretty darn good recordings.
I agree. They are really good. They're undeniably lo-fi, like, in terms of like you can like a softness or sort of like a
Yeah.
something about it sonically that you can just tell it doesn't like it doesn't pop, or maybe it needs some kind of like
Yeah.
remastering or something. But the actual recordings and the arrangements and are fantastic.
Yeah.
Um, so I think they're strong songs.
They are. Now, what about the production of the non-live tracks, the rest of the tracks on the album? What was your kind of impression of that production compared to the previous Mallon produced albums, right? Restless Stranger, California. Engine.
And the engine,
Yeah.
the thing that's puzzling for me, and this is part of the arc of the band, it is, on Engine, they sounded like an electrified full band, like a hard rock and bar band, almost at
Mm.
times. And California, of course, they kind of swapped and I'm generalizing, but they sort of swapped out the electric guitar sound for more acoustic kind of based sound. And this is sort of like a step towards clear, where like the atmospherics are almost like
Mm.
more forward versus the actual
Yeah.
instrumentation. And but combined with like it being sort of a lo-fi production, it's just got this kind of hazy, soft sort of like feel to the whole thing that you can understand why like radio wasn't going to embrace anything, off of this
Mm.
album, because it just doesn't like you or pop. You know what I mean? It doesn't have
Yeah.
the oomph. But that's part of the beauty of the
Yeah.
thing, and that's part of the beauty of this album, I think, is just it the story of how it came together, and it's this cobbled together thing, and there's a couple live things and a couple of solo things, but somehow it holds together as like this encapsulation of the band and what they're capable of.
Yeah, I've got to say, I as this opinion kind of formulated for me, I was surprised by it, but I think that I've decided this is the last of the Tom Mallon released albums, okay? Or the Tom Mallon produced albums. I think I've come to the decision that I like the production on this album better than any of the previous albums. And
Oh,
I couldn't
interesting.
quite figure out what that was. I'm to a certain extent setting the live tracks aside because they are a little bit of a different animal here. But the studio tracks that are on this, I absolutely love the production. And I was like, gosh, why? I think that we talked in the previous episodes, primarily when we were talking about California and the Restless Stranger, but I think it holds true for Engine as well. There is a certain sterility in Mallon's production that is not present here. This is a very warm, very atmospheric, spontaneous album, but very atmospheric, right? And it is just somehow a little less perfect in a way that I really like. I think that, as we're going to talk about as we move forward, Everclear is perhaps my favorite American Music Club album, although I don't want to, I don't want to
Don't
declare that.
reveal that too soon. Don't give it away.
I don't want to give it away too soon, but I love, love, love Everclear. I think it's just a beautiful album. And I think that one of the things that you said is really one of the things that I love about that album. And I think it really is very, very present here. It's that atmospheric, that these washes of sound, right? That exist on this album. It is not a commercial. It is not a poppy album. This is a very different kind of a feel than what I was talking about with California, saying this is like, gosh, really feels like almost like a Nashville pop country album at moments. This doesn't have that feel, but I love the way this album sounds. And I just wonder, again, maybe this may never be answered, but I wonder if, in the Sean Body book, they talk a lot about how Mallon kind of was a tireless perfectionist and would work endlessly on every single track and redo certain instruments, even though the other members of the band didn't know it. I wonder if maybe time was not his friend, and he was allowed to put too much time and too much focus onto some of these albums, and just and somehow that stripped them of the warmth and spontaneity and a little bit of rawness that I think is absolutely here on this record.
I mean, my assumption or my I gleaned that Engine was where they really like he overfussed, over the whole thing. Like every note had to be perfect, every take had to, and then it loosened up a little bit for California, and that let a little bit more warmth in, and that was received really well. But then this one, probably as a product of just like they didn't have a lot of time to fuss.
Yeah.
This is even looser feeling than
Yeah.
California, and that was already kind of a loosey feeling album. So, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what I'm
Yeah.
trying to answer now, but
Yeah. Well, I think we're kind of there's some bit of agreement. I think the last kind of overall thing that I'd mention on this one is that the songwriting, it definitely feels as though these songs are a little less heavily crafted and edited than the songs on California. So I do think there are great songs on this album, and I agree with you that it is probably their most consistently strong album to date. There are no stinkers on this album at all, I don't think. But the songwriting is a little bit more raw. And I do like the more heavily iterated Eitzel songs, I think generally, and there are definitely some on here that feel a little bit more like the songs that were kind of around in the Restless Stranger Engine era, if that makes sense.
yeah, it feels like these were less fussed over, and there are definitely a
Yeah.
few, and when we get to them, we'll point it out. Like that, it feels like they weren't. The rest of the band wasn't quite sure when to end,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
like they kind of just sort of like stumble to a close, and you can
Yeah.
tell that it was like these songs were so fresh, but it's important to point out, like the Mark Eitzel 4-track of Shame recordings. It's like he was clearly like pumping out songs,
Yeah.
during
Very.
this period, and so I'm sure they were kind of like, trying to learn whichever ones are, and
Yeah.
I think the ones that wound up on United Kingdom were just the ones that kind of rose to the top of that pile, like as they were the band was getting comfortable with different songs and being like, oh, let's do this one versus this one. And, these were the ones that got to where, okay, we can present these.
Yeah.
But they were still a little unfinished.
Yeah. All right. So do you want to talk about the cover art here, Jay
Yeah.
William?
Yeah.
This is the cover of this album. It is very evocative of the cover of California. It has a similar border around the outside, and it features a black and white photo taken by Kathleen Burns, who we're going to talk about more later in the episode. But Jay William, why don't you just lay it out for us? Talk to us about what you think about this cover.
So it's black and white, and it's clearly a photo taken out of an airplane window of like part of the airplane engine. And it just very clear, bold font at the top, American Music Club, United Kingdom. And to me, like, I always thought that this, you know, uh, was like, oh, they're traveling to to the UK, like they're flying over the ocean and here's a photo. And so that's just kind of what I always thought it was meant to, or whatever vibe it was meant to give out.
Yeah, I will say that the typeface, all of that, the way that they lay out kind of the band name and the album title, very, very similar to California. I like, as we've talked about before, I do tend to like consistency in both typeface and general aesthetics of a band's covers. I love it when a band has kind of like, all their covers and typefaces they very clearly kind of fit together. That isn't entirely true with American Music Club. I think there are kind of 2 or 3 styles that they use over the course of the career, but this fits very, very cleanly in with the California cover, and I love that. I also will say that after seeing this cover, I tried to replicate. I basically took versions of that photo 8,000 times when I was in my early 20s. Like I was always taking that photo out of the window of a commercial jet.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great photo, like, and I think just the question I have, which maybe the book answers, is why did they call it United Kingdom? Like, I know that that's a song on the album, but like, was there
No answer.
another meaning to that? Okay.
No, there's no answer. There's no answer. But I love the name of the album. Generally speaking, I like the name of the AMC albums. Certainly in kind of the first 2/3 of the career, probably. And I like this one. There's just there's just a kind of plainness to it that is it
Well, I think
leaves
it's
a
kind
lot
of
of interpretation.
it's funny on one level because it's like American Music Club, and then the album's called United Kingdom. The fact that it was
Yeah,
only released in the United Kingdom, like, that's
yeah,
sort of a tip of the hat to that. And that there's
yeah,
a song on it called United Kingdom. Like, if they were making all these waves over there, then, in a way, it was a little bit of like fan service to be like,
yeah,
hey, we wrote this song for you,
yeah.
our
I like
UK
that.
fans.
I like that. All right, should we get into it, Jay William? We are
Yeah.
30 minutes into the episode already. We've yet to tackle the first song. Why don't we just dig right into it? First song on side A, Here They Roll Down. It is 4 minutes and 12 seconds, and I don't know about you, but I just want to listen.
Here they roll down like a miracle that's over. Here they slow down like a miracle that's over. Tell them for me as you see them speeding by that their lights don't light the way.
Okay, Jay William Hall. What do you have to say to me about the lyrics of Here They Roll Down?
About the lyrics,
Yeah, about the lyrics.
my assumption is that this song was written for some reason. I feel like I read this somewhere, that this was written or inspired by, like, he lived in a house or apartment that was right next to a highway off ramp, and so this song was about the noise, and that's why the sound that you hear at the beginning of the track, it's like it's
Yeah.
cars coming off of a highway. That was what I thought inspired the song.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I had a similar question. That lyrically, it definitely feels very much like another, room by the freeway song, right? Like "Lonely," which we've talked about in
Mhm.
a previous episode. Okay, um, and I love the sound of the cars going by. Now, according to Sean Body's book, this song was written sitting outside of Tom Mallon's studio, which was underneath kind of a highway overpass in San
Oh,
Francisco.
okay, maybe that was what it was. It wasn't an apartment or whatever.
But I will tell you that I had a very similar reaction to these lyrics that I did to Lonely, right? It's this kind of, it's an outsider song. He's talking to the nameless people in these cars as they go by, um, and kind of commenting on the perhaps the hollowness of the pursuit that they're engaged in. Busily driving here and there and everywhere. He has kind of opted out of whatever that pursuit is, that kind of big idea pursuit, right? And he's in some ways feeling alienated by him opting out of that, and also commenting on the hollowness of that. That was my interpretation of the lyrics to this song.
There's also a layer here as I reread them, of, maybe like, and I could be misreading this, but maybe like, romantically, like he's single,
Mm,
and because there's the whole part in late in the song where he says, "If your broken face can find a lover, give away
mm,
your chance to fly, give away your willpower. Look at me, I'm free." Like he's
yeah,
saying,
yeah,
like, I'm on my own, but I'm also like super lonely.
yeah,
You people in your speeding by cars doing your things, like you've given yourself away to somebody or some love, and have no love. Like I'm
yeah.
here alone. So it's both like criticizing them, but also like super lonely.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we talked. Maybe we should just transition into the music, because we talked a little bit about that kind of the sound that opens the record. It's a really interesting choice, but an incredibly fitting choice, I think, for this record in particular, because that the sound of the cars going by. I didn't measure it, but it lasts a good 20 seconds, right? Um, it takes a while for you to realize what's going on at the beginning of this album, but I love that. It's just so atmospheric, and it's not as though the music kicks in. It does not. It really just kind of tiptoes in. And he sings in this very kind of like sparse, atmospheric way for the first 3 verses, I think.
Well, yeah, like it's a choice. It's a creative choice to be like, we're not just gonna like kick the album off with like our big banger.
Yeah.
Like we're gonna open with this like slow rise sound effect that's gonna carry for like 30 seconds before
Yeah.
you hear anything. And then when you do, it's just lonely plaintive voice kind of slowly coming
Mhm.
into focus. And but in the meantime, there's opportunity. Like you can hear Ebo. I think it's Voodoo
Yeah.
on Ebo in the background, just like
Heavy
slowly
funk.
coming out of the fog, and there's no drums, like nothing rhythmically to anchor you to anything, and it's just all atmosphere, the whole thing. And I mean, that's such a cool way to open the album. I mean, it's evocative of Big Night, how they opened Engine in a way where they opened with a mood, not a song, that you're going to remember the catchy whatever. It's a mood that they open with. And this is a very uh, representative mood, I think, for the whole album. It's dark and but beautiful at the same time.
Yeah, mysterious. I think of this song as being very mysterious, but I want to go back to the Voodie Ebo thing. I made notes about that as well. He, I think it's Voodie. It's either Voodie or Pearson. I'm not entirely sure. You know, you said it was Ebo. Uh, it, at the bridge, it's like it's a very pretty melody, very pretty guitar that Eitzel is playing, and that goes on for like two verses, and then the bridge comes in, and there's this just this slightest something that happens in the background. I think by Voodie or Pearson, whatever it is, but it gives this weird off kilter kind of feel, right? And then that builds a little bit, and it kind of like prepares you for when that big distorted guitar blast happens, kind of towards the end of the song. But
Yeah.
it's right in that bridge, the song takes this kind of disconcerting turn that I just love.
Yeah, they hit some sort of dissonant thing in
Yeah.
there that, like, the mood, it's because it's sort of been sustained, and it's been sort of dark and grim, but also kind of, like, pretty, and then it kind of suddenly gets a little ugly, and then that, like, boom, like, hits at the end.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
The thing that I noted when I was listening back to it is, the big climactic boom, and then there's, like, a second sort of hit that happens a measure
yeah,
after, and then no more, and I'm like, "Why did they do, like, 2 hits?" Like, it was, like, the
yeah.
big boom, and then a weaker second boom, and then it was, like, nothing after that. I just thought that was kind of a curious, construction or whatever.
Yeah, I I have to say that, we talked a lot in the first few episodes about, is American Music Club kind of one of the first slowcore bands? This song is so slowcore. I mean,
Yeah,
this is
totally.
absolutely slowcore. And again, we've talked about it, in the past with a few other songs, but I mean, this really is one of these songs where it's like, gosh, like it would be hard to argue that this wasn't a a very influential song to the kind of follower bands like Red House Painters and all those bands that you and I like so well.
Mhm. Yeah, like, perfect layering of, like, especially when it hits that, like, big hit at the end, I mean, because there's kind of, like, distorted electric kinda cloud going there, but then there's also, like, that pretty sort of Tex-Mex get
Yeah,
acoustic guitar, classical guitar kinda sounding thing going on the one end, and the whole thing is like like a tone poem. It's, like, not like
yeah,
a traditional rock song or whatever.
yeah, yeah. Well, I loved it. I loved it. Are you ready to move on to the second song on the album,
Yes.
though?
Yes.
Okay, so the second song here is "Dreamers of the Dream," 2 minutes and 59 seconds. I want to listen.
Always in a hurry, impatient to get away. Always think that things look a lot better when they're seen from far away. But if you take me by the hand, I'll love you like the sea. I'll wash over every border, drown every boundary. Why won't you let me in?
Oh my gosh, Jay William.
Dreamers of the Dream.
Dreamers of the Dream. Can we talk about these lyrics a little bit? I want to begin by quoting. I don't do this often. Hopefully, I don't do this often, but I am going to do it here. I'm going to quote these lyrics. One line that I just think is so beautiful. But if you take me by the hand, I'll love you like the sea. I'll wash over every border, drown every boundary. I just think that there's so much that is beautiful in a classic love song sense in the lyrics to this song. I just gotta be one of my favorites on this album without a doubt. And then after re-listening to the album, I'm maybe it's one of my favorites in the entire catalog. Very pretty song.
I second your recommendation on the song. It's one of my favorites on the album. And I think that for people who were maybe fans of California And,
Yeah.
I think a lot of people who got into California got into the sort of beauty of it, like
Yeah.
the prettier songs. And this one is a total, because after Here They Roll Down is kind of like a weird, unsettling opening.
Yeah.
And then this one comes in and it's just a straight up like crooning, beautiful ballad.
Yep.
And great production. The way he starts the song and ends it with a couple, always in a hurry, impatient to get away,
Yep.
always think that things look a lot better when they're seen from far away. Like the way he
Yeah.
bookends the song, it's just really like cleverly kind of constructed, and
Yep.
it feels really casual, but it's beautiful, and I think like that must have been, people must have been so psyched, when they heard this album for the first time out of California.
Yeah. What you just brought up about the production on this and the similarity in many ways, the more direct connection to California kind of stylistically was definitely something that I noticed as well. I am gonna I am gonna throw out something, and I want to see if you bite on it. I love the production on this song as well. I think it's just beautiful, and I wish the entirety of California was produced with the same kind of style aesthetic. I think that this is clean enough that it is clean, right? It's like a very it's a clean poppy production or poppy enough production, but it is not sterile at all. And I just wish that California, had the warmth of this production. But you can see in here that warmth is not, it can work just as well with the more traditionally constructed kind of country ballads. On this album, and I suspect it would have worked just as well in California. What do you think about that, Jay William?
I think one of the things that makes this song sound like the production of it sound so warm is the piano. Like this is Charlie
Yeah,
Gillingham, because this is one of the songs on the album where you can hear piano playing in the background, and it adds
yep,
this like really gentle, old style Nashville kind of feel to the
yep,
whole thing that I think it was almost like that's the missing piece, from that California
yep.
sound, because I don't think there was like piano on California anywhere, but
Mm-mm.
that it almost takes it into like it's a precursor to things like the Jayhawks, who were just bubbling up around the same time, but a couple of albums into their early '90s run, like they really hit on this kind of like alt country, but they had real earthy country sounds, and there was always a mix of like guitars and keyboard, piano
Yeah,
kind of, and this is one of the few instances I think where piano plays that role in the AMC catalog, because they didn't really
yep.
have like a full-time piano player,
Yeah, now, talking about how this song feels, I think it would be foolish not to bring it up. We've talked about it briefly before, but of course it's Charlie Gillingham, who went on to be a member of the band Counting Crows. I, this is a very you can feel kind of a Counting Crows vibe in this song. Is that wrong? And saying it that way is maybe putting it a little backwards, but like you can hear in this song, I don't know that this is true, but you can hear in this song that AMC in the Dreamers of the Dream kind of, that embodiment of AMC could have easily been an influence on Counting Crows, right?
I mean, I think you could probably point to songs in the Counting Crows catalog where Charlie Gillingham's piano is prominent, and he's got a style that is
Yeah.
similar to this style. Now, the one thing I will say is that for all of the songs on this album where the full band is playing, it does feel like they've kind of just learned the songs, like,
Yeah.
and he's kind of playing these little fills and these little things, but it also sounds like he's noodling, just kind of,
Yeah.
and it's probably because he just learned the song, and but he was good enough to wing it. And so I'm sure that, yeah, like Counting Crows undoubtedly has something that you could be like, oh, that sounds like Dreamer the Dream.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, it sounds like you didn't fully take that bait. But I will say,
I just
Jay,
don't know Counting Crows catalog well enough to be like yes or no, you know?
yeah, I am not an expert in the catalog, but I'm familiar with the pretty familiar with the catalog. And I have because this theory has kind of like percolated for me since we've been backtracking AMC. I will say that I reached out through Instagram. I have no personal connection here to Adam Duritz, and I asked him just in the message directly, "Hey, I know that you guys were kind of running around in San Francisco, and AMC was around back then, and Charlie played with AMC at least on a few tracks. Was this a band that you would consider an influence at all?" I have not heard back yet. I may never hear back, but if
Right.
I do, you listeners will be the first to know. And Jay
Can't wait.
William, you'll be the second to know. I'll tell the listeners first, and then I'll tell you later.
That's fair. I'll hear about it through the grapevine. That's cool.
Okay, fair enough. All right, so should we move on to Nevermind? Are we ready to move on to Nevermind already?
Yes. Track 3.
Okay. Nevermind. Okay, 4 minutes and 5 seconds. I think it's about time that we give that a listen.
You wonder what I want from you. Never mind. You wonder why I say the things I do. Never mind, never mind. You wonder
Jay
what
William, I
I
think the first thing we should address here is the use of the term Nevermind as a Gen X staple. Okay? Of course, we all know that word or two words or compound word from the Nirvana album of the same name. It's used in the song "Smells Like Teen Spirit" pretty famously, um, and it's the name of the album. That's right, yeah. But
Well, yeah.
this predates that,
And it's the name
and
of
I
the
do
album.
think that
You know, the big
Nevermind
Nirvana. Yeah.
as a song as a word is somehow reflective of the zeitgeist of Gen X in those days. Do you buy that, Jay William?
Yeah, I had never thought about that, and I actually never even realized. Oh, yeah, Nirvana called their album Nevermind. You know, they made it one word or whatever. But like, you're right. Like that is a very Gen X attitude.
Yeah.
Or you know, like a cliched Gen X attitude. But yeah, I mean, as used in this song, like the whole song is built around that concept of like saying never mind about, you know, it's like I care about this, but I don't expect you to care about it, you know,
Yeah.
kind of attitude. And that's very Gen X. Yeah. Good call.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like these lyrics, I like these lyrics. I love the first verse of these lyrics, but I think that there's you know, talking about that Gen X thing and the use of the term never mind. I think these lyrics somehow felt very Gen X to me because it's like these like very earnest expressions, expressions of sincerity and earnestness, immediately followed up by the use of the words never mind as kind of like a retreat from the earnestness, because earnestness, I think, stereotypically is a very like uncomfortable thing for Gen X, right? I think if there's a Gen X stereotype, it is a generation that was heavily sarcastic, heavily ironic, generally a little, you know, too cool
Yeah.
for
Or
school,
too
tried
cool
to,
for school. Yeah.
yeah, didn't like, you know, when people would say something that was very earnest, there was like a strong negative reaction to that.
Yeah. The impulse is always to make fun or cut it down, you
Yeah,
know?
that's right. That's
Yeah, so it's like this song in a way, you know, it's sort of like a defense mechanism, like I'm gonna cut myself down before, you know, you have an opportunity to kind of thing.
exactly,
Um,
exactly.
yeah,
Mhm.
I like the lyrics to this song a lot too, and this is the first song that is one of the live tracks on the album.
That's right.
You know, and it's essentially Eitzel solo.
Mhm.
Um, I think there is a little bit of like atonal kind of keyboard that kind of is in the background at some point. Um, and you can feel the intimacy, like you can feel the hush in the room,
Yeah.
and this becomes kind of like a blueprint of sorts for some of Eitzel's solo stuff. I mean, this is a blueprint for Songs of Love Live.
Yeah, for sure. And this is the song when I was listening to it that really kind of, uh, uh, it flipped a switch in me, where I was like, you know what, maybe the Mallons were onto something here, because when you listen to this and you really have just been listening to the kind of studio records catalog of AMC up to this point, it does give you this glimpse of like, holy shit, there is something ineffable in the live performances that you get here, and it's scarily intimate, right? It is like just almost uncomfortably intimate, and I think that is a real hallmark of Eitzel solo live. I never, and so I didn't see AMC the full band live too too many times. I may have only seen them once full band live, but it was not quite the same as seeing Eitzel solo. That intimacy wasn't quite as intense as when you see him live solo. So, I, Jay William, one of the last things that I wanted to just mention about this song before we move on, that struck me is there is a lyrically there are certain themes, right? I've used the made up word Eitzlerian here, talking about it before. But one of the tropes that I think you see consistently in, not in every song, but like it pops up again and again in his lyrics over the course of his career. Certainly there's this kind of like hopeless, foolish, romantic thing, but there is this thing that he does where it's Eitzel singing to Eitzel, meaning it's almost like he is singing to himself almost in the third person. And that's the way. So the really obvious example here is Johnny Mathis's Feet, right? Where he kind of is singing in the role of Johnny Mathis, you know what I mean, to him, Mark Eitzel. And I think this kind of pops up a few different times where he's essentially singing to him. He's writing lyrics to himself in this weird third person. And I feel like this is the perspective of this song, right? That there is a bit of that, like, I'm talking to myself in this song. I'm addressing this song to me, which I just think is interesting. It's not something that you hear from a lot of different singer-songwriters. But I like it. And I think it for me, that's one of the elements that you hear for the first time in this song.
Yeah, self-deprecation is part of the Eitzel songwriting DNA.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so are we ready now? Are we ready to get ready? We are ready to get ready for United Kingdom. This is the last song on side A of United Kingdom. It is 4 minutes and 20 seconds. Why don't we give it a listen?
Sit back out of harm's reach. Watch the little cup of poison chasing its own tail round and around till it's exhausted and at its wit's end.
Okay, J. William Hall, do you want to start with the music? Do you want to start with the lyrics? I will leave it to you.
I want to start with the music. So, like, this one is coming off of Nevermind, which is like, the super spare acoustic, like no drums.
Yep.
And then this one comes in immediately with the electric guitar, kind of the lead line. But this is one of those songs on the album that you can tell, like, they did not quite have this one fully cooked. There's no drums.
Yeah.
No bass. As far as I could tell, it's just like an electric guitar and a mandolin and his voice, and that's carrying most of the song, and it feels a little like, okay, we have this riff and we're kind of gonna run this riff. We got a chorus, and they had the bridge worked out, but they weren't quite sure where to end. It sort of stumbles to an end a little bit, but it's cool. Like it's like this tense little
Yeah.
the way he sings is very earnest and kind of there's a menace to
Yeah.
the whole thing, like the guitar riff. And and it creates a mood. It's another mood piece for them, but in a different way than the other ones on the album.
Yeah, it's very menacing. Menacing is exactly the word that I used, and I attribute almost all of that to Voodie's guitar. I think that's Voodie playing that guitar. But again, it's this almost 1950s kind of a guitar line, right? And
Mhm.
sound. So again, it was evocative to me of Chris Isaac, who we've talked about a couple of times, right? There is a real
Yeah.
kind of Chris Isaac-y vibe in that guitar part, but 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 somehow in combination with just Eitzel singing, it's incredibly menacing. Of course, I don't want to leave out. I think there's some Dan Pearson singing in there as well. He does a little bit of that.
Yeah, and actually that adds to the mood quite a bit, that like that distant harmony that
Yeah,
just comes in every now and again. It's super verbed out, and it
yeah.
adds this just kind of like, yeah, it just adds to the air of menace around the whole thing. Like I think it's really effective.
Yeah. Yeah. In a lot of ways, I think what you're saying is right, about this song. It doesn't have this feeling of being like incredibly well constructed, well done, overwrought, but, it really, I think, works super well. I love this song, and it is such a mood. I mean, it really gives you a very different mood than any of the other songs on this first side. It's just it's great. Now, lyrically, I think this is kind of interesting. It is another Mother song. Now, I don't know if I'm being entirely too Freudian about all of this, but there is on the first, on the first few AMC albums, there is a lot of Mother stuff. And in the Sean Body book, he talks a lot about Eitzel's kind of fraught relationship with his parents, especially his mother, in a sense that she was, a sense that he had that she was cold and, I don't I certainly can't opine on that, but this is kind of feels to me like primarily a mother song. Whether the mother in this case is a metaphor for something or whether it is just literally the mother is not all that important, but it is another one of the mother songs in the Eitzel catalog. I interpret the name of the song as going back to his very early youth in the United Kingdom, right? So he spent the early I can't remember when he left, when they ended up back in the US, but he, spent his very early youth in the UK. I feel like this is a song about him as a very young kid in the UK and his relationship with his mom. That's why it's called the United Kingdom. In the same way that Take Courage, which is I think it first shows up on Songs of Love Live, is another UK song that he wrote about his time there as a kid.
That's a really thorough analysis. I had thought, like, I couldn't make out, like, I read these lyrics and was a little like, I'm not sure what this is about, but there were enough things in there that I thought, like, maybe it's about his childhood in the UK, but I didn't make the mother connection. But when you read some of the lines now, it does seem like that has, that's the easiest explanation. When you held me in your arms, why didn't you want me?
Yeah.
So um yeah, I never thought about that song this deeply, but that's what we do on Backtracking.
You're backtracking it. Now in the Sean Body book, he has an interesting kind of theory or statement that criticism that he makes around the Eitzel kind of mother relationship lyrics that appear on the early albums. He identifies a song that appears on those 4-track demos that were done before this album called Mrs. Right. He writes kind of endlessly about how much he thinks that Mrs. Right is one of the lost gems of the American Music Club catalog. But he also identifies one thing that I thought was very interesting. He said his interpretation is that this is another mother song, but this is the first time Eitzel is writing about a mother in a positive way. It seems as though it is not necessarily his mother, but it is a very warm song about some mother figure sending kids off into the world. I do not I don't have an opinion on it myself, but Sean Body
It's possible that it's possible they're both about his mother, like he had good and bad feelings,
It could be, but Sean Body says that Mrs. Wright marks the end of him wrestling quite so directly with his relationship with his mother in their career. And after Mrs. Wright, kind of moving forward, his lyrics change pretty substantially, where they're much less frequently directly about his history and his past. And they draw from a more kind of diverse set of influences and experiences. I think it's an interesting statement, and we can just kind of keep that in the back of our mind as we backtrack through the rest of the catalog. But I appreciated that level of close reading by Sean Body, wherever you are out there, Mr. Body or Bodie.
Praise be.
Yeah. So, Jay William, that is the end of side A of United Kingdom. It is, I don't want to say it's flawless, but it's pretty darn close.
There's nothing that you could point to that you could say like, oh, this is the big hit of the year or whatever, the lost hit of the year. Like none of these songs are like hit songs, but man, the way that they hold together and just individually, each one is distinct and different enough, and it showcases a different side of AMC. Flawless side one.
Yeah. All right. Well, then why don't we leave it at that? We should sign off for the week. Please, if you're out there listening, why don't you just give us a review? If it's a 5-star review, if it's a 4-star review, why don't you just save it for another podcast? Pick some other podcast and give them a 4-star review. We want 5-star reviews. Please send us an email, backtrackingrocks@gmail.com. Follow us on Instagram, backtrackingrocks. Follow us on X, backtrackingrocks. Go to see us on Reddit. Backtracking Rocks is our username. You can find us in the American Music Club subreddit, which is a very exciting place to be these days. Take it, like it, share it, slap it, flip it, rub it down. No, come on. Come on, Joel. Let's go. We are going to be back next week with side B of United Kingdom. So, Jay William, is there anything you want to promote? No?
Next week.
No, just next week. That's it. You don't want to promote anything except
what do you mean promote? Like what would I promote?
Oh, any of your projects? You don't have anything you want to promote?
Oh, I don't know.
No.
That's gross.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do that. Hey man, I'm Gen X, man. I'm not a sellout. I'm not
We don't even, listen, the advertisers are constantly, they're just beating a path or beating on our door. They're saying, please, will you please sell a manscaping men's pubic hair groomer on your show? We will give you a referral code. I say, no, we're not going to do that shit. We're not going to sell any of that shit.
They're like, here's a bag of money. Will you please just mention us just barely in one sentence? And I'm like, fuck that. No, I will not, because I am of a certain age where that is a sellout move.
Yeah. And then you take that money and you punch them in the face with it.
That's right. You beat them.
Yeah.
Repeatedly.
With a bag of money. I'm just going to hit you in the nose.
And you walk away. You
Yeah.
walk away. You leave the money behind. You
That's
don't
right.
look back.
And you pull out a Camel wide light out of the top pocket of your flannel and you light that fucker up.
That's right. And then you take the match and you fling it behind you, and the whole place goes up, and it's like, like somehow you put a trail of gasoline. I don't know.
Okay, we'll see you all next week. Thanks very much for listening. Bye-bye.
Bye.